Okay, so as you will know from the kind of the introduction and the invitation for today, what we were hoping to do was really focus around bringing some of our European members together to strengthen or look at ways in which we can strengthen making links and connections across our European region particularly. So what we thought it would be useful to do really was to sort of give a little bit of an overview about IACD, although I think everybody here is, well, with the exception perhaps of Diane, who's a newly joined member, well versed in IACD and what our purpose and vision and mission are. So I'm not going to labour those points particularly. But one of the things that you'll be familiar with from the e-bulletin that's been going out as well is the fact that this year we're celebrating IACD's 70th year, albeit we're in the 11th month of that. So there's not long left for the celebrations. But we're also very much looking to the future of IACD and the next, really, I suppose, the next decade, and engaging now with members around the development of a new strategy, which we're intending to be a 5-year strategy that will take us, substantively forward from where we are at this point. So we were hoping within this year then, and with these regional membership gatherings, to give a bit of space to consider what some of the really significant issues are that as practitioners or as educators we're working around, and what the key role or roles for IACD within our, that fit with our purpose ought to be within the context of a new strategy. And at the same time create some space here for a little bit of connecting and networking as well. So we have a couple of activities, I suppose, and small group discussions, but it's important for us to keep in our heads from an IACD point of view the fact that we are a networking organisation and association for community development practitioners globally. How we do that is, you'll be familiar with those key mechanisms around publications, these kinds of gatherings, the conferences, the practice exchanges, and so on. Recognising that we have, in 2018, launched a globally shared definition of community development to support that understanding of what we mean by community development, which is very much about practice-based profession and a discipline that's promoting participative democracy, development, human rights, economic opportunities, equality of economic opportunity, and social justice, underpinned by a very clear set of values. But for all of you here, I think you're all familiar with that in the context of IACD, as well as within, sort of your own fields of practice across the UK and Ireland. So we don't need to labour that point, but we did feel it might be useful for some of our other members who might have been joining and be less familiar with IACD and its work. There are some key things, I suppose, for us that are really important thinking about IACD and the next 10 years. And they're not so much about the issues that we want to work around or we feel collectively we ought to be, but are some broader guiding principles for us. And some of those are things focused around the diversity of voices that we appreciate and value within IACD, seek to promote and encourage, but recognise that there is a lot more work to be done and that we need to do as an organisation to facilitate that meaningfully. So in many respects, that's an underpinning commitment that we want to realise in our strategy moving forward, as well as staying true to our purpose and acting with integrity and in solidarity, particularly with communities experiencing the most significant marginalisation and disadvantage. So I suppose in many respects, that's the kind of some of the underpinning things, and you will be aware of membership survey. I don't know if you've all done it yet, but we will share a link to that here if you haven't, because we'd really value and appreciate your inputs. I'll do that in a minute, but we have a couple of slides that we wanted to share with you, just to sort of, as a European members regional gathering, what does our European membership in IACD look like? So I'm going to just share a couple of slides to illustrate that, and Kira, I believe, is going to take us through that, if I can get the slides up. Okay. Can everybody see that all right? I know it's not the one about European membership, but it does have the QR code. Sorry, I'm just trying to, it's gone back to the beginning. There we go. There we go. So in terms of the membership survey, if you haven't had the chance to complete it yet, there's a QR code there that you could access it with through your phone, or that little link, and I'll put that link in the chat in a minute. But looking at our European membership, and given the interesting thing is that everyone who is here is from either the UK or Ireland, that's going to connect quite well with the next slide, really, next couple of slides. Kira, do you want to pick up?
Well, I would have been happy for you to keep going, but I will pick up. So sorry for people who came new onto the screen, you will have missed me introducing myself. So just to say, my name's Ciara Shanahan. I'm based in Ireland, and I'm the coordinator of the All Ireland Endorsement Body for Community Work Education and Training. I think I've met some of you before who came more belatedly, but some of you haven't. So as you can see, I mean, it says it on the slide itself, we have 104 members in Europe, across 13 countries. But you can see, looking at the map there, clearly there's significant countries of significant size where we've no members. I mean, maybe it's something that we as individual members of IACD may have contacts and connections in those countries, that it's useful to kind of draw attention to the existence of IACD. In case people are interested, it would be nice to have a spread across all countries. I know certainly there's some of the countries represented there where I've had engagement or connection with people over the years, and having looked at it now and seen it so starkly that there's no one from, for example, Spain or France, Poland, etc., where we've no members. I'll be kind of following up with individuals. So 8 individual members and 16 organizational members, and of the 88 individual members, 18 of those are students. Anna, would you mind going on to the next slide, please? So this, I suppose, this just shows it more starkly. I think, Anna, you might have referenced it, like it's very clear the vast bulk of our membership is coming from the UK. And then Ireland. So despite Ireland's sort of size, we're still making up 10% of the membership of IACD. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's where those who are most interested in community work and community development are located. But I do think it's worth looking beyond that, where we see countries where there's 1%, make up 1% of the European members. That could be as little as 1 or 2 people, given the numbers. It's probably 1 actually in most cases. So in some ways, we don't really know what it tells us to one extent, but on the other hand, we do know it tells us there's a lack of awareness of IACD in lots of countries across Europe. And I'm imagining where we have only 1 member from a particular country, that's through some connection with somebody else who's already involved with IACD. So I think there's a bit of trying to promote and generate awareness of IACD on a wider basis in those countries. And maybe actually, Anna, with the development of the new website, that will kind of lead us in that direction. So yeah, that's a picture as of now of our European membership. And I mean, I suppose it reflects very much those of us who are on the screen anyway today. We all come from the UK or Ireland, if memory serves me right. I may be forgetting somebody, and apologies if I have. Yeah, so that's it, Anna. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just stop sharing for a minute. Some stark kind of realities there. And clearly, as an international organisation, that's something that we want to work to, you know, build our European membership. And the best way that we're able to do that is with our existing members as well, actually, sort of, you know, more explicitly talking about being members of IACD when they're connecting with others in other European countries and other global regions as well. But it is also something for us to think about in terms of our new strategy. So I suppose we're just kind of reflecting on that a little bit. And perhaps if everybody had been able to join, who we'd have on the screen now would be maybe a little bit more reflective of that wider European picture. Because we have some active members in those countries, even though they're very much in the minority numerically. So I don't know if anybody's got any observations or reflections on that, but we just thought it would be interesting for those of us joining a European region members meeting to see what our European membership looked like, even on, you know, on a map. Jim?
Yes, just to add a bit here as to whether IACD has any, I would describe it as partnership links, you know, with some of the European context. Because I know, for example, there's some people I relate to, you know, wearing another hat, who are very much committed to community development principles, and in a sense use the standards and use all these things. That's an organization that has a kind of faith link, but it's called interdiac, which means interdiaconia, because diaconia is a European word for, you know, for service. And in a sense, I know that interdiac has run training courses. In fact, has offered a degree that's very close to community development, which is qualified by the university in Prague. So I'm just saying that, I mean, that it's just that kind of link that's there. But that organization certainly has very strong links with Finland. I just can't remember your chart for a minute there. But again, you know, that I mean, there's really, we're talking about a substantial number of people who are kind of practicing community development along the lines that you know, broadly we would think is acceptable and approve and
connect with,
and some of these are being challenged all the time, not to be just service oriented organizations, but developmental organizations. So you know, if it's helpful afterwards, happy to sort of forward a few addresses that I know and I kind of relate to, but it would just affect that picture. And I know that Interdiac has done work in Moldova and other places, and I think Ukraine has had some workshops already on an IACD type thing, 2 or 3 universities there, but they didn't appear on, you know, on the map in terms of membership. So I think there's some work to be done, you know, around membership, and I see that as positive rather than really too hard, you know. Anyway,
I'm sorry, just Jim, just picking up on that. I had a quick look on their website. Like, they've done workshops in Italy, Latvia, Finland, Armenia, Estonia. So Interdiac, sorry, that is.
Yes, so that's I say that's and actually the person who leads that, who's driving force, is actually a man from Manchester. so in a sense he has an appreciation of, you know, of us really in that sense, as well as pushing through these kind of ideas. And obviously, you know, some of his work has been unfortunately restricted by, you know, by the Ukraine war and other things that link to these countries. But anyway, I'm just saying that's a positive link there that's worth following up in some way.
No, that's great. Thank you. Maybe take Bob. I see your hand up, and then we'll move on to the sort of the next bit, which I suppose is kind of connected to this to some extent as well.
I was just going to say, you know, we're heavily involved in Eastern and Southern Europe, and heavily involved via the European Association of Providers of Services for People with Disabilities, and also through the Citizen Network, both of which have got very, very extensive Eastern European and Southern European membership. And you've got to say that the European Union has something to do with that. At the end of the day, the Commission funds a whole gang of projects. There's always opportunities to put together projects between, if you like, the more developed countries where we're not necessarily getting it right at all, and we're maybe exporting the wrong stuff, and countries where civil society is still having to be reborn in a sense, in places like Moldova and where we've worked, and in places like North Macedonia and Croatia and so on. What I'm very aware of is that within ESPD, we basically make it very, very easy for people from Eastern Europe in particular to participate in everything. So there are reduced rates for everything. There's grants for people to participate. There are conditions for joint projects, which basically say you're not going to get support unless you've got a number of these countries involved. And I think actually the real way forward is actually helping people do stuff rather than helping people go to lectures and conferences. That's certainly been our experience.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, I think this discussion in some respects follows on from what we were sort of chatting about when our numbers here earlier on in the meeting were very small. But what we also wanted to do was to get a sense of what some of the issues are for the communities that we're working around, the key communities, and the key issues. And obviously, because of who's here today, we're going to get a fairly sort of Western European, UK, Ireland perspective on that. But nonetheless, there are some really critical issues that span right across Europe. And hopefully that will lead us then into further discussion about how we as an organisation developing new strategy, thinking about the future, thinking about building that membership and making that relevant and meaningful for people in other parts of Europe as well as other parts of the world, how we begin to think about that. So what we have is, because we thought we were going to have an awful lot of people in this session, a bit of a Menti activity. So I'm just going to share the screen again for a second, and to give you the link to that. Okay, so kind of thinking really about what these issues are, the key issues that we as practitioners are sort of focusing our work around, because they are the most important. If you can go to, I think there should be two ways to do this. Either if you Google menti.com and then put that code in when you're prompted, it should take you into our question, or you should be able to access it if I copy this link. Okay, so front and centre, climate justice, racism, far right, migrant and minority, I think that's right, democracy, disconnection, housing, poverty, cost of living, linked very much to poverty, inclusion. Far right's up there twice. So democracy issues seem to be quite strong as well. That's great. So I suppose kind of, what does this mean for us? Are there any kind of, anything there that's resonating, which there probably is, because there's a few things that have come up more than once. Any surprises? Why are these burning issues now? Any thoughts around that?
Well, I'll just say, by the way, it's kind of can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of reassuring. I just published a book in the summer, which I don't think is very good, but I was nagged into doing it, and it was called Social Justice in an Era of Turbulence, and it was an attempt to collect some essays together which said, how do we hang on to the values of social justice at a time of turbulence? And the commissioning publisher said, well, you can make your own mind up about what turbulence is. And they're all there on the screen. There was downstream of the economic crisis of 2008. There was climate change and environmental action. There was the growth of racism and fascism, and the move much more towards nationalism and the far right. Of course, we've just seen that in Argentina yesterday and in the Netherlands today. So they're actually all in there, which is reassuring for me anyway. I can't think of anything major which isn't there. I mean, you've got cost of living crisis and poverty. We might add, in Britain now, we're talking about just destitution.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these issues certainly resonate with me in terms of the things that we're grappling with here in the north of Ireland. And I know, Diane, from what you were saying at the start, when there was just 3 or 4 of us in the call, climate issues, climate justice, climate action are absolutely front and centre for you as well. I mean, across the UK, is everybody else who's in the UK seeing these as the key issues? And Ciara and Diane in Ireland, what do you think?
I'll just chip in because I have to go and join another meeting with Plan for Peace, because we're talking to people in Palestine and Israel who are on the ground, and I want to be there. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, please do chip in.
So my passion is the democracy's failing, because if you look at those individual issues, it's exactly what Gary just said. Our values are not translating into decisions and the policies that our government is making. So that's been my passion about, really in all of these, when you look at these things, it is about corporate interests so often. Definitely in climate change, it's corporate interests. We're losing our access, growing inequality to access to healthcare in Fermanagh, poverty, all of these things. These are all decisions, as you know, by government. So it's about how we actually work out how to build democracy. And that's what I've been working on over the last year. And I think it is about recognizing where people are at and how people are feeling. And that's where my passion about Brené Brown's work, about understanding that disconnect, because, neoliberalism, Margaret Thatcher just wants everybody to be an individual. And I think Brené Brown has got a lot to offer about, how we can help people bring them together. But I think a big part is about networks. And I've learned that so much when we've got our ban on petroleum licensing to fight the industry, establishing oil and gas, operations here in Northern Ireland. It was only done when we brought networks right across Europe, America, and everything together to bring pressure onto the government. So I think there's a lot that we could do about that, about building those networks, about bringing everybody together. And that's my sort of passion that I really want to do when I get finished this degree. So that's my little contribution, and I'm sorry to have to leave you. I would love to stay. Unfortunately, these meetings overlap, but I would be more than delighted to hear from anybody who's interested in creating radical change. I would love to hear from you. I'm not sure how you get in touch with me from here. I'll put my email address into the chat, and
by all means do.
Lovely to meet you all, and I hope to meet you all again, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thanks for joining. I know you need to go now. Just to say, we will be hopefully having another networking meeting for European members in around February time, before the new strategy would be finalised or come into effect. So, and these are themes that, you know, if they're coming up, they're important, they're transnational, crossing jurisdictions and borders, then they are the issues that need to be featuring as the key priorities for us. So thanks, Diane. I'll maybe stop screen sharing now, because I think we're probably all clear enough about what some of these issues are. Any other observations? Oh, we've got somebody joining. Around any of that before we go into maybe a couple of discussion groups. Colin? And then I'll come to you, Jim. Sorry, I've only just seen your hand up there.
Okay.
Yeah, just a bit of an observation that I think quite a bit of what I would see around in Glasgow, not that any of those issues aren't there and around, but I see an awful lot of community organisations that I think are really struggling just to kind of perpetuate themselves, keep going, if you like, and just as and on the one hand, with a lot of very basic issues about, well, somebody said about destitution, you know, kind of just those basic cost of living issues for individual people and for the community and the broader community, and the community organisations themselves, as I say, you know, on a bit of a treadmill at times, just kind of, as I say, keep going from one week, 1 month, 1 year to the next, and often being caught in a cycle of having to chase funding for things. So, you know, some dead kind of basic things there around for me, and a real lack of any actually community development support, the kind of community development support that would maybe help people to move on from that.
Yeah, and I suppose in many respects that climate and environment of organisational hand to mouth and uncertainty, chronic uncertainty, also makes it difficult then to have the space and the wherewithal to organise around some of the key strategic issues or systemic issues as well. So it's from a neoliberal point of view quite convenient that organisations are experiencing those challenges and difficulties, because it means they're less likely to be able to formally organise around some of the key issues. Jim, let's maybe take your point. Michael, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Sorry for being late. I'll just squeeze in.
No, well, you're very welcome, squeezed or otherwise. And apologies if you had any difficulty joining. We have had some technical issues with the link. So apologies if that was an issue for you. And you're also very welcome as the only person joining us who is not from the UK or Ireland.
Oh, okay. So I get a good overview then what's happening on your ends of Europe.
Yeah, so lovely to have you. Jim, I will come to you. Just conscious of our kind of time frame here for the discussion as well. And we did think it would be useful to break up into a couple of smaller groups, just to give a little bit of thought about bringing forward some of these issues that we've highlighted, and thinking about IACD and the future. So we will do that in a minute. Maybe just 2 groups I think would be more than sufficient. Jessica, if you could carve us up in fairly equal terms. But Jim, we'll take your point first.
Yes, happy just to correct me or help me to see it differently. But one of the things for me that was absent on the map was just that whole issue of increasing inequalities. You know, I mean that inequalities are increasing quite a bit, and I mean one local authority in the northeast here, working with others, has actually developed an inequality strategy. An interesting thing is that that particular authority has been guided a little bit by Michael Marmot, you know, the Marmot report that looks at inequalities and things. And I think there's about half a dozen local authorities across England, you know, who you know, jargonized as being now considered as Marmot authorities, because they're trying to focus on that. So it's just as, in some ways, the map in a sense, didn't actually talk about inequality. It didn't actually mention it. I couldn't see it on the chart, and and where it features is really quite important, because I mean, I think if we take that kind of language on a kind of global scale, then there are increasing inequalities, and in some ways, the UK's position on that, hasn't altered much. We're the bottom of the league in terms of really thinking about inequalities issues. So I just say that somehow that language is there, and if we were involved in communities of a more affluent nature, how do we address inequalities? How do we talk about inequalities? How do we look at these things? It's really quite a challenging kind of idea. So I just wondered whether I'm misunderstanding something, or whether that perhaps is something that needs to be around.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's not, I suppose we're trying to just sort of force things a little bit by saying the top three. It doesn't give an awful lot of wriggle room, but also I think these things are all connected as well, and inequalities in many respects covers, spans across them, because how some of those issues are experienced is much more damaging and detrimental for the more disadvantaged and marginalised communities within our societies anyway, and certain sections of those communities too. So the inequalities agenda, for want of another way of saying that in a very few number of words, I think is absolutely fundamental. Well, what we thought we'd do now was maybe just sort of to have a little bit more of a discussion, break up into a couple of groups, and just think about a couple of questions. Colin, I'm going to hand over to you to introduce that, if that's okay.
I won't really do a preamble given the time. I'll just run through what the questions are. So we have three, as Anna says. First one is, what do you value about making connections with community development colleagues in other countries? And obviously, if you've got examples of that that you could share, I think that would be particularly helpful. Or if it's just what you would like to do, then that's equally relevant. And then secondly, what would you like to get from your membership of IACD? And then thirdly, the kind of reverse end of that, or the mirror image of that, if you like, what could you contribute? What can you contribute as a member of IACD? So there's one about what do you value about making connections with CD colleagues, and then what would you like to get from your membership of IACD, and then there's what can you contribute as a member of IACD? We talked about having a feedback of 1 point on each. Maybe Anna, better just to say if each of the groups could think of one main point to feedback, given that we're quite short of time here.
We're sort of rapidly hurtling towards the 4:30 mark.
4:30,
yeah. So maybe if we could give about 10 minutes for discussion, and then come back together, get a little bit of feedback, and then think about next steps, if that's okay with everybody. I think that's us all back.
I think we had a sort of central point that came across really strongly, which kind of linked up the bit about what people would like from IACD and what people can contribute, because there was a point made about just basically making it much easier for members to connect directly with each other, and a suggestion that contact details should be made available, and perhaps that should be as part of the process of joining, that everybody be asked, are you happy to share your email address on the IACD website, and then that if that was available, I mean, I suppose that could also include some kind of basic information about interests perhaps as well. That's a slightly more complicated. But anyway, that if that was there, then I think people were feeling that then it would be much, much easier to contribute by making connections with people across countries and developing sharing interests and developing shared interests. I think hopefully that is a fair reflection.
Okay, thank you. And the other group, Kira, were you in the other group?
Okay, I probably won't do the discussion justice, and we could have done with way more time, but we all know that. So I suppose essentially we were saying, look, there's huge value in having those opportunities to share and learn from others in other countries and jurisdictions. And I think maybe I'm going to take what Gary said at the end, because I think it kind of summed up a lot of what the rest of us were saying, that IACD has a really important role to help to facilitate the process of building relationships across countries and providing opportunities to build solidarity, in particular when things go really pear-shaped in one country, that there's learning and support from other countries that can kind of step in at that point. And also just IACD as a vehicle for promoting examples of good practice. But essentially there was a general feeling that we've so much to learn from working and networking with others. And even sometimes when we're doing it in a paid capacity, you actually learn more than you actually give as a practitioner. And you learn both the good and bad of about your own practice from hearing from others, and also exposing your practice to others as well in other countries. I hope that's kind of a general sense of it anyway.
Okay, thank you. And just to add into that, because Kira Bradley, who was here just before we broke up into the small groups, had to leave to go to another meeting, but actually highlighted a couple of thoughts of her own, which were very much in agreement with what you've just been saying, the value of sharing, learning and good practice, and being able then also, but through that kind of an opportunity, to be able to look at organic opportunities to take that further collectively in small collaborations or maybe even more formal partnerships, but not necessarily, but just the opportunity to build that connection through sharing, and then that leads often to something else, and creating the space for that to happen is really valuable.
Sorry, Annie, just something you've said there has triggered something which Bob spoke about. The challenge when at a European level, 64% of our members are based in the UK, and post-Brexit, the challenge of kind of accessing funding to support that kind of exchange across countries in Europe, that it would be hugely beneficial even on that basis to extend our membership into other European countries to be able to tap into those funding sources, to I suppose to create those opportunities for work and cross collaboration. Sorry.
Yeah.
And just to add to that, Kira, our experience in ESPD and Citizen Network has been actually getting on the ground and doing stuff with each other has led to links with other organizations in those countries and growing membership as a result. So it's actually being there and being able to get out and share and run seminars, but also to work on practical projects in a multinational way actually grows membership quite significantly. And if you look at ESPD now, it's run by Eastern Europe, and quite rightly so, because they desperately need that expertise at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we have some logistical challenges in that respect with Brexit and not being part of the European Union anymore, from a UK context, that is. But nonetheless, I think there are still opportunities, and they emerge from connecting and sharing. So that's really, yeah, Bob?
When we started with ESPD, recognizing that people from Eastern Europe couldn't come, we went to them. And so we started holding events in Belgrade and in Skopje and wherever, and it actually worked. So, that may be part of the solution.
Yeah, and looking at how that then can be supported and resourced as well. Not necessarily something that could come all from within an IACD initiative, but sometimes it's a bit like the practice exchanges, really. People look at creative ways to secure some funding, pockets of funding to support, you know, individuals and small groups to take part. But there's another body like IACD that might do a lot of the logistical organizational side of things. And that's something that we had talked about previously, which was practice exchanges at a more local level. And when I say more local, in the first instance, I mean not internationally global, but maybe at a European regional level for us as European members, or within, you know, the UK and Ireland, or within the Balkans, or whatever. But I think those are all things that are worthwhile looking at in terms of what people feel is valuable. But I think they lead from those initial discussions again about creating the space for people to connect and share what they're doing in the first instance. And perhaps we don't do enough of that, actually. Well, I know we don't do enough of that. There's no perhaps about it. Okay, any other thoughts or observations from the discussion this afternoon and what's emerged from it before we try and draw things to a close? Jim?
I just wonder whether IACD might find a little bit of space ahead, probably for me sooner than later, that just tries to think critically reflective of what's happening, for example, in Holland and what's happening in Argentina. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, what did happen in Poland, you know, to a slightly lesser degree, which is thankfully going the opposite way. But what are the implications for us operationally in these kind of contexts where, in a sense, the right wing is suppressing a lot of the kind of ideas which I think come from IACD. And having said that, to a much lesser degree, 5 actually colleagues here in the northeast of England have actually been suspended from the Labour Party for actually saying something relatively radical on Facebook, literally suspended from the party. And if you look at actually the selection of, you know, of the potential government, if there's a change in this country, then in a sense, some challenges there for community development as well, as far as England is concerned. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying that there's a wider European issues that's some kind of debate to inform us and to raise our critical reflection levels would be interesting. And in a sense, as you know, in Holland, that's kind of very racist agenda, you know, is features very, very strongly there in terms of the elections today. Mm-hmm. Anyway, yeah. I think it would be helpful to see where does community development sit and begin to help manage, relate to that kind of political agenda, really. You know, quite tough.
Yeah, and how do we as an organisation express the scope and the space to support community development practitioners dealing and addressing these kinds of issues as well, because that can often be a very lonely position to be in too.
Absolutely.
So I think that's also very, very key and increasingly so. Okay, what this is all kind of in my head suggesting as well is that there are not just themes that are emerging, you know, that there's a strong focus around, but also some directions and directions of travel, stroke strategic actions perhaps that start to translate themselves into what would you would put into a strategy. None of these are things that we can do something about in the next, you know, two weeks or 2 months, but within a strategic plan, what would that look like? And then on a year by year basis, what would that look like? And the rider for us, and I'm often reminded of this by colleagues, is we are also a very small organisation, and we have to be realistic about what we can put into a plan or a strategy as well, and commit to. But that's about a reality check once we're clear about what the key things are that are important to be addressing. And in relation to the Ukraine, as is the case in relation to a lot of the former Soviet states, our membership has gone in the last 4 years, should we say, rapidly up, and probably fairly rapidly down again in the last year, year and a half. And that was by and large down to one of our members who was a trustee, whose organisation was extremely active across the post-Soviet space, particularly on the ground, but with a focus predominantly around disabilities, and actively engaged across, numerous countries. That resulted in a strong growth in membership and a lot of actual work that we were doing supporting them in situ on the ground with workshops and so on. But then when the situation in Ukraine arose, that became quite fragmented. So what the current picture is, I'm not sure, but I suspect if we looked at it over the last 4 to 5 years, we'd see something very triangular having taken place.
Yeah. Before I think it'll be interesting what Bob has been saying today, and maybe IACD has to look carefully as to its partnerships and where it links in partnerships. And in some senses, the other one I mentioned earlier, but Bob mentioned a few things there that in a sense that IACD is not the umbrella. It's completely, it might be on a partnership with other people doing very comparable things, and recognizing that and linking that. And anyway, I think that's been helpful today.
Yeah, it is very much about IACD working with national or sub-regional partners on the ground. It's not about IACD, going in and doing anything. And apologies, I misheard the question or the comment. I thought it was Ukraine, but it was clearly UK. Apologies.
It was, but actually your answer was much more interesting than what I was raising and much more important. So thank you for that. But it's good to have the breakdown across the UK as well. But I think what you were raising about Ukraine, I think we have to be thinking about that. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. How often do we meet?
That's a question that we were hoping to kind of conclude with, really. The regional meetings in some global regions, sub-Saharan Africa being a case in point, who have monthly meetings, and then other regions where meetings have been very sporadic at a regional level. We had one in May for European members. Before that, there was one 2022. I can't quite remember what time of the year it was. We're interested as the European trustees to get your sense of what you would feel would be beneficial around that, again, within the context of what's manageable as well. We weren't thinking of monthly, maybe 3 to 4 times a year, but that could be very much directed by the European members, and we're open to your thoughts or suggestions around that.
Perhaps we could aim for quarterly and see where we get to.
Yeah. So quarterly, Bob?
I was just going to say, it seems to me if we don't talk to each other often enough, we're not going to generate anything that is about a joint activity. So yeah, I'd have thought 6 times a year wouldn't be unreasonable.
Okay, so we've gone from 4 to 6. Any other thoughts?
I'd be happy with 6 if that was feasible. I've found this enormously useful, and I agree with Bob that I think the more we do this, the more we'll generate perhaps more involvement and more stimulation for ourselves, but that might be quite a big ask for those of you that are organising it. I'm not sure.
I think 6 is. I think maybe we need to take away those requests and just consider it. I was thinking in my head 4 times as a starting point, because I know when I came on as European Regional Trustee and said, right, how often do we meet at a European level? Even though I was a member, but I couldn't remember having been at that many. And I wonder if it's more realistic to go for 4 next year first and kind of build a base from that. I mean, if we feel that that it's very manageable and there's momentum there, then we could up it, in the second half of the year. That'd be my suggestion, because we're coming from a very low base. I think.
Okay, well, we had talked, amongst ourselves, as maybe having a follow-up one in February. Maybe if we think about end of January and then see how we're getting on, because from our point of view, this is all part of our work plan, and needs to factor into the new strategy as well. So if we said end of January,
Okay.
is that okay? And then at that point we can kind of think, right, where do we want to go with this? And I think if we got to a point where it was every 2 months, then there's possibly something of a core group of European active members who might take on some of that organising and hosting around those bi-monthly meetings or whatever. But let's reconvene towards the end of January and give that more thought amongst how things are firming up generally. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And
January is good.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll look at some dates and come back to everybody around that and try and get that in the diary within the next couple of weeks, maybe, if we can, so that there's plenty of notice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Anna.
Any other finishing points that anybody would like to slot in before we depart?
Just thanks. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for organising.
Okay.
Have a nice Christmas.
Well,
yes. The dreaded C word. I'd quite happily bounce right into January if I could at this point in time. But nonetheless, thank you everybody for coming, and really appreciate your time. Sorry about the glitches. We will get that sorted out for the next one. And do have a very happy Christmas, peaceful time with family and a relaxing time. And we'll look forward to seeing you in the new year. And keep in touch in the meantime. And if you haven't done the membership survey, do it, please. Your thoughts are really valuable. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Anna.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.